I'd like to welcome everyone. I know many of you know me, but I'm Rabbi Sue Shankman of Washington Hebrew Congregation. I'm delighted to welcome you to WHC's Inside the Issues, which is hosted by our Empty Nesters. And as we get started, I want to just remind everyone of a few housekeeping notes. I know we are all experts at Zoom at this point, but we invite you to remain muted. If you have a question, you can put it directly either to me in the chat and I can share it, or you can also, I'm sure you could direct it, although I know the chat gets distracting. So we'll save a little time. We will certainly save some time for Q&A. I want to express our deep gratitude to Joan Churchill for her tenacity in making today's event happen. No mean feat in the midst of the rev up to the midterm elections. And we're so honored and grateful to welcome our speaker, Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland's 8th District. Since he is a congressman for many of the people here today, he is very well known and certainly is well known to our congregation, where he has shared many Freedom Seders and MLK Shabbats and other opportunities. But to briefly recap, he was the lead House manager in the second Senate impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump, and currently serves on the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. He also serves on the House Judiciary, Oversight and Administration Committees, and the Rules Committee. Prior to Congress, Representative Raskin was a 3-term state senator in Maryland and a professor of constitutional law for more than a quarter century at American University Washington College of Law, where he happened to be my sister Rebecca's mentor as a Marshall Brennan Scholar. He has, as he has shared with us in his book, Unthinkable, Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy, which is linked in the chat. This has been a challenging time, both personally and professionally. We are so grateful and appreciate your finding time in your heavy schedule to help us understand the challenges democracy in America is facing. So again, the link to the book's in the mitzvah mall. And just to frame this as we get started, we're reading Parshat Noach this week, the Torah portion about Noah and the ark. And the Torah portion starts by telling us that Noah was righteous and blameless in his generation. And we're also told that the earth was filled with lawlessness. And as we think about certainly your book and the scenes of January 6th, which, by the way, happens to be my birthday, sadly, or, ominously, I don't know. But as we think about how we reclaim our democracy and how we rebuild, we're so honored to have you with us today and look forward to hearing your thoughts. And again, I know that there are some who said specifically they're hoping to hear about your book. I know just from sharing with our confirmation students in the past, one of the reasons why you are so good at what you do is because of the importance you place on those personal relationships and connections. So I preface anything that we're going to hear and say with just recognizing that we have limited time. So I'm going to step back and not take any more of that time. We've limited time, and I know in that time that Congressman Raskin will certainly share thoughts and help guide us to as we look towards the future to thinking about how we might play a role in this rebuilding and doing the good work that he does every day. And we're so grateful to you. Thank you.
Well, Rabbi Shankman, thank you for the beautiful introduction. I did not realize that you were Rebecca Shankman's sister. That makes me very, very happy. She was my prize pupil, and I think she was my research assistant for a while and a Marshall Brennan fellow. And
I will tell you, my parents are on here right now too, so they are thrilled, I'm sure, to hear that. But my dad reminded me of that, and I realized I don't know. We talked about that I think years ago, possibly, but anyway, it's a nice connection.
Well, that's too cool. That's too wonderful, and congratulations on becoming the new rabbi at Washington Hebrew Congregation.
Thank you. Well, and I look forward to welcoming you again and again and to doing good work together.
Well, thank you. And I'm always excited when I hear about a a nonviolent transition of power like that. So congratulations to you.
Thank you.
That's
Me
great.
too.
And you're going to give me something. I didn't know it was your birthday on January 6th. You'll give me something to celebrate. Please invite me to whatever celebration you have, so it won't be a completely melancholy, bittersweet day. You know.
We'll have a special Shabbat evening. It's a Friday this year.
I'm delighted to be with everybody, and thank you all for coming. And for those of you who've already read my book, thank you. I am deeply grateful. Thank you, Joan Churchill, for, I think, approaching me about doing this sometime last summer, unless it was the summer before that. I can't remember, but you're a sweetheart for advancing this, and I'm thrilled to be with everybody. And since I am ridiculously overexposed in every media context these days, why don't we just go right to Q&A, and you don't need to hear me filibuster at all. I'm sure I'll get to answer everybody's question. And so the floor is open.
Great. I have a couple of questions that we had just to start. You know, one of the things you talk about in you talk so poignantly and beautifully in your book about the balance, and one of the quotes that really jumped out at me, also because I was a huge fan of Elijah Cummings. You wrote you quoted him in his words, "You're never too busy to be doing what you ought to be doing." And I thought that was such a so profound and so simple. So what ought we be doing? And you know, those of us who are not elected officials, but aside from voting, and so I just want to remind everyone that's coming, what ought we be doing?
Well, yeah, I've forgotten I related that little vignette in the book. Elijah had recruited me to the House Oversight Committee, and I went to talk to him because after the 2018 election, when we picked up dozens of new seats and we were able to recapture the House majority, the Speaker approached me about joining the Rules Committee, which took me to at that point, I think, 5 committees, and I was just stressing out about being on so many committees with so many meetings and so many hearings and everything. And that's when Elijah kind of uprated me and said, "You're never too busy to be doing that what you ought to be doing." And that penetrated deeply, that point, you know. And so you got to figure out what you should be doing, and then figure out from there, you know, how to make it work. And so, look, the democracy is obviously under siege all over the world, and you know, the autocrats of Moscow have found the kleptocrats of Mar-a-Lago and the theocrats of Saudi Arabia, and all of them are folded in together. Erdogan and El-Sisi and Marcos and Xi, and all of them are rooting for the destruction of American democracy. And we are fighting with everything we've got to help the people of Ukraine defend themselves and expel Vladimir Putin and his filthy imperialist aggression against the people of Ukraine. We're doing whatever we can to help the women and the girls of Iran against their morality police and their theocratic tyrants. And we're doing whatever we can to stand up for American constitutional democracy and the right to vote and reproductive freedom and all of the rights of the people that are under siege by our own homegrown right-wing tyrants who are on a rampage in America today. So the good thing about this is that there are no shortages of opportunities for people to fight defending democracy and freedom and human rights all over the world and right here in America. So, you know, and that can mean more overtly partisan political activity. It can mean defending books and the right to read. It can be helping defend women's right to healthcare, right to travel, which is under attack in some states. and just generally the upholding democratic values and ideals wherever they're under attack, because they're pretty much under attack everywhere. I liked very much Joe Biden's speech that he made about defending democracy in Constitution Hall in Philadelphia a few weeks back. He got attacked, of course, by some people because he said that there were semi-fascist elements in the Republican Party with the MAGA Republicans. And the political scientists tell us that the hallmark features of a fascist or authoritarian political party are a cult of authoritarian personality wrapped around a charismatic, or at least allegedly charismatic, figure who dictates to everybody what to think and what to do. 2, they don't accept the results of democratic elections if they don't go their way. And 3, an embrace of political violence, or a refusal to disavow political violence as an instrument for achieving power. So, if the shoe semi-fits, you semi-wear it. I think Biden made a really good speech. But I will say this, I have a criticism of it, which is he made it sound like democracy is static and it's just a set of fixed electoral practices and institutions. Democracy is not static. Democracy is dynamic. This is something that Tocqueville remarked upon in Democracy in America, where he said that he perceived that in America, democracy and voting rights are either shrinking and subsiding, or they're growing and expanding. And of course, we've been in a contractionary period with the voter suppression tactics and the gerrymandering of federal and state districts and the use of the filibuster to nullify pro-voting rights legislation, and the use of the Electoral College, which is in the Constitution, to give us popular vote losers 5 times in our history, twice in this century alone, and increasingly to steal the popular will away from the Electoral College process. So we are very much in a fight to defend democracy, but also we must keep democracy moving forward. And I know I've got a bunch of constituents who are part of this, and a hello to all of you, but we also know there's a bunch of people who live in Washington who go to Washington Hebrew Congregation. You are the only residents, the 713,000 people who live in Washington, D.C. are the only residents of a national capital on the planet Earth who are not represented in their own legislature. If you told the people of Paris that they couldn't be represented in l'Assemblée Nationale because they breathed the same air as representatives in parliament of people from the provinces, you would have another French Revolution on your hands. And in fact, when we've passed DC statehood twice now in the House of Representatives, and the second time when I got to be the floor leader for a while, I started by thanking the people of Washington, D.C., who have a real political grievance, not an imaginary one, a legitimate political grievance, not a fictional one, and yet did not come down and beat the hell out of our police officers and hit them over the head with Confederate battle flags and Trump flags and stab them with American flags sharpened into spears. They've done it the right way by having a statehood constitutional convention and requesting admission. We need to admit DC as a new state. We need to admit 3.5 million disenfranchised American citizens in Puerto Rico as a new state. We need a constitutional amendment on the right to vote. We need to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to repair the damage done by the Supreme Court to the Voting Rights Act in the Shelby County versus Holder case. We need to get rid of gerrymandering of our districts, which is the first plank of the For the People Act, which passed in the House, but fell just shy of what we needed in the Senate. So what that means in this election is that we need 2 new Democratic senators who act and vote like Democratic senators, because that's going to be the only way to get around the filibuster, which is blockading so much progress on everything from democracy to reproductive freedom and codifying Roe versus Wade to a universal background check on violent criminals purchasing weapons. You know, the filibuster is not in the Constitution. The filibuster is not in federal law. It's a rule of the Senate, already riddled with exceptions, more than 100 exceptions, including the Trade Adjustment Act, the Budget Reconciliation Act, judicial nominations. And so we need a Senate that will carve out the exceptions for voting rights and democracy, as well as reproductive freedom and the gun violence legislation we need to prevent more horrors taking place, like the shooting that just took place in another school today.
Thank you. And I not to go down this path, there's so many questions already in the chat. I'm going to try to, I'm going to synthesize a few of them, but you may or may not remember this exact date, but we brought our confirmation class. I believe it was within a week or 2 weeks after Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, the shooting in Florida. We had kids who came in and they had their speeches all prepared, and you sat down and said to them, I know you've prepared these speeches, but let's talk about this. Let's just talk. And you listened to them. And I think that that's one of the things that I think concerns so many people, is that there's a sense sometimes of, and there are a number of questions along these lines, that we've become so bipartisan and so oppositional in even our ability to just listen to each other, to hear each other, to have that dialogue. And I know that is a big part of what you do, of your work, is you put your heart in it, in the sense of recognizing that we need to be able to hear each other. We need to be able to be in relationship, to be able to have those conversations and move forward. So along with that, there are a number of questions having to do with what do you see as the future of the two-party system in the U.S.? Is a two-party system essential to our democratic system? And also in light of Representative Cheney's comments yesterday about the state of the Republican Party, what is your sense of what the future portends for our two-party system in coming years?
Well, the Constitution, of course, doesn't mention political parties. And, Richard Hofstadter, the historian, once wrote that it was a constitution written against political parties. In any event, it doesn't mention two parties, much less a two-party system, much less two specific parties. Under our First Amendment, anybody's got a right to create whatever party they want and to associate and so on. There's a political scientist named Maurice Duverger, a French political scientist, who hypothesized that where you have single-member districts, as we have for the House, or you're electing one office like a governor or president, the electorate will generally sort itself out into two major camps of political opinion. Others think that it's just an artifact of particular electoral rules and structures. There have been times in American history where there have been multiple parties, the Republicans and the Democrats and the populists and the progressives and the greenbacks and so on. So, I think of it as historically as a more fluid structure, and it might be healthier. I mean, to have more than two parties. How many channels do you have on your cable TV? 87 or 150 or whatever. People say, well, it's too complicated to have more than two parties. I don't know. I think most people can pretty much handle that. But having said that, I, of course, am a true blue, dyed-in-the-wool Democrat. I think what's happened to the Republican Party is a scandal. I'm seated at my desk here in the Rayburn House office building, and I'm going to show you what I've got on my desk. This is a bust I inherited from my grandfather, who was a state senator, of Abraham Lincoln. So I've got nothing against the Republican Party historically, or Abraham Lincoln. He began that as an anti-slavery party, as an anti-racist party, as far as you could go in the 19th century. It was a pro-immigrant party. He deplored the know-nothings. He couldn't stand the know-nothings and what they were doing to attack immigrants in that period. But Abraham Lincoln's progressive party, the Republican Party, has been reduced to a cult of authoritarian personality under one guy. I mean, 2020 was a remarkable year for many reasons, but one was that they went to their convention and they came back and they had no platform. For the very first time in American political history, a major party met and came back with no platform, which tells you what? Their platform is whatever Donald Trump tells them it is. And they couldn't predict, of course, because he's so erratic and unpredictable. But today it's very clear what the platform is: the big lie, election denialism, anything that it would take for them to get power. If you check out Madeleine Albright's last book, Fascism, A Warning, she says it's a mistake to think of fascism as having a fixed, stable ideological content. Fascism is just a strategy for taking power and maintaining it. And if you think of it in those terms, you can see why there's no platform, because anything that will be said that needs to be said in order to obtain power for a group that is a clear minority in terms of American society. And I've been out campaigning in Wisconsin and Minnesota and Pennsylvania. I've been all over the country for colleagues who are in these tight races under an avalanche of negative ads and right-wing money. But, I tell people, like, take hope, have some faith, because the vast majority of the people are on our side. Hillary beat him by 3 million votes. Joe Biden beat him by 7.5 million votes. The young people are coming our way. They are beyond the racism. They're beyond anti-Semitism. They're beyond the immigrant bashing and the homophobia. And alas, they're also a little bit beyond grammar, but that's a different problem. They're a generation with very good values, and so if you look at it from the standpoint of GOP strategists, they've got to be using voter suppression and gerrymandering and filibuster and all of those anti-democratic mechanisms. So I'm with John Dewey, who said the only solution to the ills of democracy is more democracy. And what we're suffering from today is not democracy, but impediments and obstacles to democracy. So what everybody can be doing is going out and to fight for democratic freedom and remind people of the relationship between democracy and freedom. Lincoln put it like this. Lincoln said in the middle of the Civil War, he said, constitutional democracy is like the beautiful silver platter upon which rests the golden apple of freedom. And so what he was saying is, if you don't have democracy, you can't have freedom. It doesn't guarantee that you'll be able to have freedom, but you're not going to get freedom with autocrats like Vladimir Putin, who's thrown all of his political opponents in jail and shut down the newspapers and thrust their country into, a bloody war of aggressive attack against the sovereign nation of Ukraine. You're not going to get it, with the tyrants of Saudi Arabia. Like, that's not going to happen. It's only democracy that gives you a chance to have freedom and to fight for the rights of the people, like the reproductive freedoms of the people that have been safeguarded by the Supreme Court for the last half century, until the gerrymandered, Trumpified Supreme Court decided to overthrow it. They took my constituent, Merrick Garland, who is the chief judge of the DC Circuit, the United States Circuit Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, and he was nominated by President Obama in February of 2016, 11 months, 10.5 months before the election. And they refused to give him even a hearing, saying it was too close to the election. We're going to let the people decide, ignoring the fact that the people had decided by electing Obama president for a complete 4-year term, which is what presidents get under our Constitution. But anyway, they derived that new rule, which they quickly discarded 4 years later when Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died several weeks before the election. And then they barreled through the nomination of Mrs. Waterford, whatever, I blocked her name out, to put her on the Supreme Court to create their anti-Roe versus Wade majority. So anyway, democracy and freedom stand best when they stand together. Our democracy is needed for freedom to flourish and to be protected. And so we've got to unblock all these channels of democracy so the majority can be heard.
So thank you. And a number of questions that are here in the chat. One, I want to be mindful of those who put some early on. And one of those was asking you to please comment on how people like Dr. Oz, Herschel Walker, and J.D. Vance can be leading or tied with legitimate legislators.
Well, look, there's one major qualification for becoming a candidate in the Republican Party, which is you have Donald Trump's approval. So, you know, the more deranged your politics, the more extremist and lunatic your worldview, the more likely Donald Trump's going to endorse you. I mean, it operates like any religious cult. I mean, I've ordered every book that there is on religious cults and deprogramming. Got to check out this book by Steve Hassan, who's a doctor, a psychologist in Massachusetts, who wrote a book called The Cult of Trump. I mean, and he figured this out a while ago, the way that it operates. And so, you know, I'm with you, but I mean, they don't care. I mean, you know, people will correctly accuse them of cruelty and hypocrisy and lying and betrayal of the Constitution. They just don't care as long as they are demonstrating obsequiousness to Donald Trump, who's controlling the money and the endorsements and the politics and what have you. So look, I mean, it's like dealing with a deranged person in your workplace or your family. You've got to organize the people who have mental health and sanity to stay together and to keep things moving forward.
Thank you. There was actually a question on that issue, just in terms of mental health and how we work towards that, and given you know, so many issues on the plate. One of the specific questions was to comment on the role of the public school system in facing the current challenges to our democracy, if there's a role there, and how do we strengthen that? And also, I would add to that, I would add to that the question of mental health and how we work with our public school system to ensure that is on the agenda as well.
Yeah, well, we've been fighting in both the American Rescue Act and in other of the COVID-19 relief bills we've done to get mental and emotional health counseling into the schools and to support that however possible. As usual, that's become a partisan disagreement. But we've been able to get some funding out there, and you know, and we've also been able to get the new suicide hotline number, the 988 number, and so we are making some progress there. You know, when you've got a majority of young people in the country expressing symptoms of depression or anxiety or some other kind of mental or emotional malady, it's hard to stigmatize it. It's hard to marginalize it. I mean, this is something that's affecting pretty much every family in the nation one way or another. And so we've got to make this a central commitment for what we're doing. I mean, in one of the autocratic societies, they're not going to care about the mental health of the people any more than they care about the physical health of the people. If anything, it's a danger to the regime. But in a democratic society, if we're going to remain in a democratic society, we need everybody's healthcare tended to, and we need to make sure everybody's got access to healthcare. And we're dealing with the physical and mental and emotional healthcare needs of the people. And so that means you know, making it possible for people to get mental and emotional health care as part of their primary care, if possible, or if it's got to be delegated out and referred elsewhere, that's meaningful, that's stable, that's real, and that people are going to get the attention they need. We've got a long way to go in order to make real the promise of you know, parity, treating physical medical health the same as mental health and emotional. And you know, and I'll just say, in terms of the citizenship in the schools, I mean, it's a critical thing. A lot of schools have dropped teaching civics. For me, I think it's critical and essential. I wrote a book for high school students called We the Students about all the Supreme Court cases that affect young people in public schools, like locker searches, drug testing, censorship of yearbooks and newspapers, the desegregation cases, Tinker versus Des Moines, the black armband case, and so on. And so they're able to learn about the Supreme Court and the Constitution through cases that affect them and open up a conversation about it. That book, by the way, was just banned by the state of Texas last month. It was sponsored by the Supreme Court Historical Society, and they banned it. And the very next day, I was banned for life from going to Russia by Vladimir Putin for my pro-Ukrainian activities. So I wear them both as a badge of honor. Banned in Russia, banned in Texas. But I'm
walking the walk.
I'm sorry.
I said it's called walking the walk.
Right. Well, I'm glad I've got a friendly audience at the Washington Hebrew Congregation. Right.
So there are, of course, some questions having to do with January 6th, and one of them is the tension about the outcome of the midterms is increasing geometrically. What is the Democrats' worst case scenario plan to bring the January 6th investigations full circle to indictments and trials? And along with that, there was another one. Hold on, sorry, I know where it is, which was assuming that the House flips, then what for the committee?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one hypothetical I don't enjoy entertaining. Let's see, starting with January 6th Select Committee, you saw that we did our last investigative hearing. We continue to do the investigation, so we're gathering more material, but everything right now is just for our final report, which will be completely exhaustive and comprehensive as far as we can go. I mean, there are obviously some people who have refused to testify or are not turning over information, like Donald Trump so far, or Steve Bannon. But we feel like we have mastered all of the major elements of the hit on the 2020 election, the attempt to overthrow the election and to install Donald Trump as president for another 4 years at least. So we're going to get that out, and we'll probably have one final hearing to release that to the public, and then also to lay out our legislative recommendations for protecting American democracy against electoral sabotage and coup and insurrection and political violence. So that's where we're going. We've been prepared from the beginning to end at the end of the year, because the House of Representatives, unlike the Senate, is a body that terminates after 2 years because all of us are on the ballot. And so every 2 years, it's a completely new cast of characters, new rules, and so on. And we have to vote in the new committee and the new committees, the new rules, and so on. Whereas the Senate, with the overlapping staggered terms, just keeps going. So we've been prepared from the beginning, like Cinderella, for everything just on, midnight on the last day for everything to go dark. Our work, I think, will be turned over to the Department of Justice, or will be entrusted with someone for safekeeping to make sure that it doesn't get disappeared like all those mysterious Secret Service texts that have gone missing. And we're hopeful that we will be in the majority again, and we can continue aggressive oversight over a number of institutions that need it, including, for example, the Secret Service.
Thank you. Just sort of a follow-up on the January 6th piece. Someone asked, do you think that our former president knew beforehand of the impending attack on the Capitol?
Oh, well, he certainly knew about it. Yeah. I mean, he obviously encouraged it. He solicited and recruited the crowd. He told them they got to fight like hell, or they're not going to have a country anymore. He knew that there were, large elements of the crowd that were armed. When told by the Secret Service and others, he said, wave them in, take down the mags, take down the magnetometers, the metal detectors, let them in. He's a guy who's encouraged and urged violence at a lot of different points. He's applauded violence at a lot of different points. And that's just part of his MO. And to this day, he says that his crowd greeted our officers with hugs and kisses. When more than 150 of them ended up hospitalized, wounded, injured, broken ribs, broken jaws, noses, contusions, concussions, traumatic brain injuries. I've got constituents who are Capitol cops who go to physical therapy 2 or 3 times a week, and mental therapy too, because of what was visited upon them. So he certainly knew about it. He certainly urged them on into battle. He didn't do anything while it was taking place other than to further inflame the crowd by tweeting out in the afternoon that Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what needed to be done. He told them to celebrate this day, to remember it forever. This is not the end, it's just the beginning. And then he's, predictably continued to praise them and applaud them all of this time. And so, I understand how hard it is to believe, but we have a president of the United States, and now he's a former president of the United States, who has been very clearly in league with domestic violent extremist groups who came to attack us: the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, the Aryan Nations, the militia groups, the First Amendment Praetorian, Rod of Iron. It's all going to be in the report. So it's not just the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers.
Amy Hathaway wrote in the chat that it seems that the GOP has mastered their appeal to the most negative, angry amongst us, despite the real benefits the very same people are receiving because of the bills and initiatives offered up by the Democrats. The Democrats don't seem to have an equal strategy to win them over. What is the plan? And then there's another comment from Jeannie Fleming about along those lines about advertising. I assume Democratic advertising not reaching the people who are worried about their basic needs. If we can't get elected, it doesn't matter how good we are for the country if ads don't speak to their basic concerns, and the Republicans have great ads, etc.
Yeah, thank you both for those messages. I mean, I've been out traveling to California and Nevada and Texas and Michigan and Minnesota, and Pennsylvania last night, and I just got back. We've got some good ads out there too. I mean, check out the ads that are taking place in Minnesota right now by Angie Craig, is in Minnesota too. Hers might be the closest race in the country right now. She's being absolutely blasted on, defund police, inflation, and so on. But she's got a sheriff who gets right up and says, if anybody's attacking Angie Craig for not supporting the police, they're lying to you, and she's been our strongest supporter. And so the things you're saying are obviously not news to people who are out in the field running in tough areas where Trump and the Republican propagandists have been able to exploit social and economic discontent, a lot of it created by Republican policies that have generated the most extraordinary transfer of wealth from poor and working people to the wealthiest people in the country in American history. So I agree, they're basically exploiting the reservoir of discontent and anger that their policies have created. This is true, and I do get this question, wherever I go from Amy, well, what's the Democrats' message and who's messaging and what's the DNC doing and all of that. And, I don't run any of those institutions, so I can't speak for them. I will tell you the message that I've been taking out on the road with me, which it seemed to do well in the Midwest over the last week. Certainly when I was in Detroit, the Motor City, and in Michigan. But I tell them that everything that you need to know about voting in America is everything you need to know about driving in America. If you want to go forward, you put it in D. If you want to go backwards, you put it in R. That's pretty much all you need to understand. But, obviously, both Gene and Amy have raised significant and important, issues about how to deal with that problem. And a lot of it relates to racism and the history of white supremacy in the country. And, the Washington Post has had articles over the last several days about, the connection to these voting patterns that people are talking about, and declining white population in certain congressional districts where people are feeling like they're in the minority and there's not a place for them. And so, you know, the traditional fight in American politics is, do you organize things around race, which obviously drives everything in a right-wing direction, or do you organize it around class, as in the New Deal and the Great Society, and say, we've got policies that are going to lift everybody up? And that's been our argument. You know, I sat in the House for 4 years under Donald Trump, where they had an infrastructure day, they had an infrastructure week, infrastructure month. They just didn't have an infrastructure bill, but Biden came in and we got it done in his first year in office, a $1.2 trillion investment in the roads and the highways and the bridges and the ports and the airports and so on. And that's meaningful to people around the country. And we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which dramatically lowers healthcare costs for millions and millions of people in the Medicare program, limiting to $2,000 what people can be forced to pay out of pocket for prescription drugs, and $35 a month for people who are diabetic, who need insulin shots. So those are concrete benefits we're offering to people. But I agree, it's just a lot easier to lie in politics than it is to tell people the truth. And it's a lot easier to activate the amygdala and try to, you know, trigger anger and contempt responses than it is to connect to people and to trigger solidarity and compassion for fellow citizens. So that's what we're struggling with. It's just the traditional problem in our politics, and we're just hoping that our people get out and don't fall for the propaganda and don't get demoralized.
So on that topic of ads and campaigns, Gary Hurwitz asks, how can Trump use what appears as political fundraising campaigns to pay his personal legal bills without even stating that as the purpose? His fundraising emails only discuss saving America, etc.
Okay, wait. So, and what's the question about that?
So his question is, how can Trump use those to pay his personal legal bills?
I got you. Well, we have a dysfunctional federal election commission, which, as you know, is very bipartisan, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And the Republicans will not go along with any kind of enforcement action, much less any against Donald Trump. So it may be that some of the practices that Gary's describing are so egregious that the Department of Justice might try and just prosecute them as crimes, which it would have the power to do. But it would be tough given the basic acquiescence and passivity of the Federal Election Commission to a lot of the schemes, which are just pure ripoff schemes. But as you saw, we dealt with them in the January 6th Select Committee, and it will be part of our report as well.
You know, we spend a lot of time these days talking about reminiscing about pre-COVID era and how things were before COVID, and you know, and now we have sort of a new normal. One of the other questions in the chat is from Suzanne Sunshine, who asked if there's any hope of our original Republican Party before Trump regaining any kind of momentum and creating a new party that represents their views. Are these old line Republicans supporting the Democrats, independents? What are your views on this?
Well, thank you. I mean, we're trying to welcome them to the Democratic Party. I'm trying to welcome Liz Cheney to the Democratic Party. You know, I think that the most difficult issues about drawing in the pro-Constitution Republicans are abortion and guns. Although guns, you know, those of us on the liberal side on guns readily concede and accept the fact that there's an individual right to own guns, handguns for self-defense. The Supreme Court has said rifles for recreation and hunting. We just reject semi-automatic assault weapons, weapons of war on the streets, and we insist on, you know, a universal violent criminal background check, which is supported by 80 or 90% of people. So I think we could come to terms on that. I don't think they're buying now the standard Trumpian NRA propaganda lie, which is that the Second Amendment somehow guarantees the people the right to overthrow the government. And this is a fallacy that I took on in an op-ed in the New York Times Sunday section a couple weekends ago. I mean, it's just a common pervasive lie on the right that the purpose of the Second Amendment is to allow the people to overthrow the government, despite a half a dozen different provisions in the Constitution which make clear that that's wrong, including Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15, which says that Congress has the power to call forth the militias of the states for three reasons: one, to enforce the laws; two, to suppress insurrections; and three, to repel invasions. And, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says that anybody who's sworn an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic, who violates the oath by engaging in insurrection or rebellion shall never be allowed to hold office again in the federal government or in the state government. So there's just provision after provision rejecting that, and there's nothing on the other side. When I challenge them, they either quote Patrick Henry, who says, "Give me liberty or give me death," which is just ironic because Patrick Henry was an anti-federalist who voted against the Constitution. It'd be like, going to Robert E. Lee to interpret the meaning of the 13th Amendment or something. And then they'll say, well, what about the Declaration of Independence, which says when in the course of human events, government turns tyrannical. Okay, you itemize, your litany of grievances. True, but that wasn't under the British Constitution or the Magna Carta that we asserted we had a right to overthrow England. That's just stupid. If you think that your government's turned tyrannical, you're appealing to the heavens. You're appealing to natural law and natural right to do it, not the Second Amendment or some other part of the US Constitution. So if they think that it was tyranny for us to conduct a presidential election, which Donald Trump lost, and 62 federal and state courts upheld the result of that election and rejected every claim of electoral fraud and corruption advanced by Trump and his forces, if they think that's equivalent to mass slaughter or oppression, well, fine, then they can take up arms against the government. But when we catch them and we arrest them and prosecute them, they're going to jail, and they're not getting out because they're citing their Second Amendment rights to insurrection, because that doesn't exist. You're on your own if you want to overthrow the government.
So I want to be respectful. I don't know how much time we have on your end. I know everyone here, there's so many questions, which is wonderful. I did not think there would be any lack. Very quick one, maybe. Is gerrymandering a threat to democracy, and will it take an act of Congress to fix Maryland's district drawing process? Yeah, well, we have as our first plank in the We the People Act overturning gerrymandering by mandating independent legislative redistricting commissions in every state in the union. Of course, that became partisan. The Democrats supported it and the Republicans rejected it and then blocked it in the Senate, saying, no, we don't want pointy-headed bureaucrats or independent do-gooders drawing the districts. We want politicians to do it. We want elected people to do it. So that's just a fundamental difference. They're now all in for gerrymandering because they're very clearly the minority. If you add up all of the votes for Congress in the country, we beat them by millions of votes every time, but we're up against a wall of gerrymandered districts in states like Wisconsin and Ohio and North Carolina and Florida and Georgia. That's how they do it. That's how, so every 10 years, they draw themselves back into power. So very serious problem. There are states that have liberated themselves from it by shifting to independent redistricting commissions. My own view is that that's just a start, because it still leaves us with the single member district problem, which is, even if you make the districts more competitive, now you've got 51% of the people getting a representative and 49% of the people not getting a representative. And we've got entire states now, like Massachusetts, where the entire delegation is Democratic, or Utah, where the entire delegation is Republican. And we got a Democratic mayor in Salt Lake City, a Republican governor in Massachusetts, but we're sending increasingly all red or all blue delegations to Washington, which also deepens the polarization in the country. So we could break that up with proportional representation. If you get 40% of the vote, you should be able to get roughly 40% of the seats instead of 0% of the seats, because they're all drawn into single member districts. So I think people will see the light on that.
once we at least get rid of gerrymandering, politicians choosing their own voters before the voters choose the politicians.
Thank you. I want to bring it a little bit closer to home in terms of our Jewish community and seeing all of this through a Jewish lens. There are a couple of questions related. One is, what rebuttals can one give to Republicans who state that their reason for supporting the party is because they are good for the Jewish people and the Democrats have not been? And not along those exact same lines, but related is, what can we do? What are your perspectives on what we see as a growing anti-Semitism that is more and more prevalent, and what we can do in dealing with that?
Well, the Jewish community has voted overwhelmingly and reliably for Democrats for many, many decades, with the Democrats as the party of equal opportunity and civil rights and human rights. The party whose president, Harry Truman, recognized the state of Israel after 7 minutes and has always tried to champion human rights and the cause of the underdog. Already we're seeing outrageous anti-Semitism being expressed in the Republican Party. We have, candidates like Doug Mastriano for governor in Pennsylvania, or Dan Cox for governor in Maryland, and recently accepted the endorsement of the Proud Boys. These are people who are organizing buses to go to the insurrection, to overthrow Congress and attack Vice President Mike Pence for not doing Donald Trump's bidding. But there have been just very disturbing manifestations of anti-Semitism from lots of people in that movement, including Donald Trump himself, who said that the Jewish community, I think he said this week, unless it was then last week, the Jewish community better get its act together and start supporting him because he's their best friend. I can't even count the number of anti-Semitic canards and tropes and myths built into that the Jewish community acts as one, that you can speak to them and tell them what to do, and they will follow whatever you do because I don't even know what he's imagining there, because he's followed whatever Bibi Netanyahu told him to do. Well, I'm not sure that that's the way it works. Jewish Americans, like all Americans, can think for themselves and don't operate robotically to the call of a cult leader.
Thank you. Yeah, and it certainly is. I think that using Israel as the leverage in that in how Jews vote, and yes, many, as if we look at it, there certainly Israel is an important part of the picture for us as American Jews, and there are a number of other issues. That is not the only one. Regarding our economy, Laura Loeb writes, many employers just can't find workers. Can't we solve that problem and immigration issues by proving a pathway to citizenship for undocumented folks here in the US and speeding up our asylum decisions? And when will employers support these much needed immigration changes?
Well, I agree completely with you, and support the DREAM Act and the different TPS legislation we've put through to try to help people who are refugees from violence and all around the world in different places. And we have tremendous labor shortages here. I mean, the Biden economy has added 10 million jobs. He's getting hit with all the criticism for the supply chain problems and the inflation, which of course he inherited. But give him credit at least for the 10 million jobs, but that's not even enough. I mean, we have big labor shortages in the service sector and the manufacturing sector and so on. So I agree with that very much. I mean, America's always been the land of opportunity. Tom Paine said that it would become an asylum to humanity, not an insane asylum, mind you, but a place of refuge for people seeking political and religious and economic freedom from oppression and discrimination. So I agree with that. I think a lot of employers do support it. A lot of businesses are on the side of immigration reform. And the real problem is that some people are just finding too much political mileage in being able to use immigration as a club instead of, coming to terms and negotiating a real solution to the problem. That's the basic issue.
Thank you. Maybe a final question. I don't know if we want to end on this note, but who knows? Should we get rid of the electoral college, and what steps must be taken to get rid of the electoral college? So there are a few questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I mean, it's the 21st century, and we should elect the president of the United States the way we elect governors, senators, mayors, representatives, everybody else. Whoever gets the most votes wins. How about that for a radical proposition, right? We don't need any more popular vote losers becoming president. We don't need to marginalize the vast majority of the country who live in safe red states or blue states. And, Maryland is a safe blue state, like South Carolina is a safe red state. And in general elections, nobody pays attention to any of us. We know exactly where the candidates go, where the resources go for TV ads, for campaigning, for offices. The vote's about 10 points higher on average in swing states like Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida than it is in safe blue states like California and New York, or safe red states like Texas or Mississippi. I mean, it's just an irrational way to do it. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year exporting American democracy, sending experts abroad to teach about the right to vote and democracy. And the one thing that countries writing new constitutions never come back with is, oh, one thing we really like is that electoral college thing you got going on over there. We think we'll import that to our new system. I mean, it just doesn't happen. It's a relic. And Jefferson, among many founders, said he deplored the sanctimonious reverence with which some people regard the handiwork of the founders, as if they are supermen and wiser than everyone else. He said, they're human beings like you and me. I knew them. I was part of them. They were patriots. They were good people, but they would want future generations to judge for themselves. And if you look at the 17 amendments that we've added since the Bill of Rights, the vast majority of them have been democratizing amendments, suffrage, expanding and perfecting amendments, like the 17th Amendment, which got rid of state legislative selection of U.S. senators, replacing it with selection by the people, like the 15th Amendment, banning race discrimination in voting, the 19th Amendment, women's suffrage, doubling the vote in America, the 23rd Amendment gave people in D.C. the right to vote in presidential elections, the 24th Amendment banned poll taxes, all of it in the direction of making America a real one person, one vote democracy. And sometimes, when I talk, my Republican colleagues will say, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. Well, of course, a republic just means a representative democracy. We're not going to fit 250 million people or 300 million people in a room and vote like an Athenian assembly. We are a representative democracy, but we are a democracy where we want every vote to count and every vote to count equally. So when I was in the Maryland State Senate, I introduced the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And Maryland became the first state. We initiated this interstate compact to say we'll create a coalition of states that will cast our electors for the winner nationwide rather than the winner in our state. But we will only be bound to do that when we get 270 electors at least in the coalition. And we're more than halfway there. We're about 2/3 of the way there, with 15 states, including some very big ones like New York and California, and some small ones like Maryland and DC and Rhode Island. Unfortunately, that's become partisan too. And it's too bad, because Trump used to attack the Electoral College. He said it made us the laughingstock of the world. It made no sense. It was cockamamie and all this stuff. And then after 2016, of course, he changed his position and discovered some new virtues in the Electoral College system. So anyway, we got to keep fighting on that front, and we got to keep democracy moving forward.
Thank you. Final question. I'm going to put something in the chat that I hope helps answer this question. But Nancy asked, what can us older people do to help with elections, etc.? I'm going to put in a link to the RAC, the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, and their Every Voice, Every Vote campaign, which is easy to get involved in. And there are ways that you can help. But I'm going to ask Representative Raskin to field the rest of that one.
Yeah, well, that's a great idea. Of course, the League of Women Voters, I love. That's the great institutional legacy of the 19th Amendment, passed in 1920. It's a century old now, but the League of Women Voters, they do a great job. Oh, I want to say hello to Carlos Landau, who wrote me a very nice note from Blair High School. Send my love to everybody at Blair, if you would. But look, I think that every campaign should do what I've done. I've turned my campaign into something called Democracy Summer, where we invite high school and college kids to come and learn about the history of political change in the country, and then learn how to register people to vote and how to canvass and conduct online organizing and so on. And so we're doing that. And, a lot of older people say, well, I can't go do this myself, but I'd love to pay for young people to be in this. And so my project is now all over the country because it's been adopted by the DCCC. I think that's the direction we need to move in, because it's been a very demoralizing and depressing time for young people with the COVID-19 and with climate change and so on. And we've got to give them some hope and some inspiration and show them that prior generations of democracy patriots have struggled through times at least as difficult as these and have gotten through it. And we need to do that. The Democrats need to beat the autocrats and the kleptocrats and the theocrats so we can deal with the real problems of the time, foremost among them, climate change. But we know that the autocrats are not going to do it for us.
Well, we want to thank you, because we know that you're going to continue to work for that and to do just that. And again, as I said at the beginning, appropriate that we have this conversation during this week when we read the Torah portion on Noach and that righteousness and the way in which you not only in your book, but more importantly off the page and what you do every day in those relationships and connections really speaks to the community, and I hope continues to speak to both sides of the aisle so that we can have those and you're able to move forward with those relationships and help to move democracy forward, because that is certainly when we talk about where this country is headed. We hope that that's a direction that can be one that is positive, and we know that you're going to continue to work to make sure that's the case. And I want to say as well, aside from being grateful for your time today and every day and what you do on behalf of not just those in your district, but all of us, we also know that that you bring honor to your son Tommy's name each and every day with what you do and how you carry yourself. And I know that he continues to inspire you, and thus he continues to inspire all of us to work for that better tomorrow. So
well, thank you, Rabbi Shankman, and thank you for your touching words. That means a lot to me. And thanks to everybody at Washington Hebrew Congregation for everything you do in your wonderful synagogue. And I love always coming there. And just from the messages I'm seeing, Rabbi, just some people seem to want to hear a little bit more about my book or whatever. And if they send me a note, I'll let you know the next time I'm going out to talk about my book, and I'm happy to do that. But,
and maybe we could include that in the future for our one of our book discussions, and specifically focus more on the book itself, which we put the link was in the chat. We encourage you to read it, and then perhaps we'll be able to get Representative Raskin back for that, and maybe even in person. We want to thank you again for your time and for joining us. We know you have to run. I want to thank as well Joan Churchill for her diligence in making this happen. We'll notify everyone when the video is posted. And also, if you have, we'd appreciate any ideas for future Inside the Issues programs. If you have ideas, you can share those with Jeff Bergman, Joan Churchill. You can also share them with me as well. And we look forward to continuing to find ways to connect, not just via Zoom, but also in person. So we invite you to join us in person for any of our upcoming events.